Hello. Yeah, it's working. Good evening, everyone, and very welcome to this talk with our very special panelists tonight. We are going to talk about Catalonia, Spain, and human rights. So the technology thing like this is broken. The agenda for the night is going to be 4 different talks, but before any one of which, I'm going to give a short presentation because there are a lot of topics to discuss. Each one of our guests has like a special topic to present, so I'm going to give the introduction. And at the end, if you can wait until all the presentations are done to ask questions, we are going to do it at the end, okay? Still broken. Sorry for that. Too much waiting, I went to sleep. Probably I can start without the PSD support, and if it comes back, then yeah. Okay, cool. First, Europe. Probably you remember a few years ago, maybe many years ago, time goes by so fast. When you were traveling, you were going abroad, and basically your main concerns were about your village, town, city, or your country. Nowadays, with globalization, this has changed, and we are living in Europe, and we have a role to take part in it. You know that we have European election. European election for what? Okay, let's go slow. Probably you've heard of the European Union. European Union, it's like a political and economic union of 28 countries, which they have one currency, in theory, and there is no physical borders between these countries, which helps with having less conflicts. There is an internal single market regulated by laws, and all the people living in these state members have freedom of movement of people, goods, services, and capital. So, to become a member of this super cool club, you just need to satisfy a checklist. So basically, in these few years, we gained more freedom, more power, especially economic power, and more security. However, when we talk about European Union, there is no one European Union, or there is like a different kind of Europe. We have European Union, we have the euro. Some of these countries want to keep their own currency. There is the NATO, there is Schengen, and others. So it's a bit crazy because every time that you go to one of these countries, like, is it Schengen? Do they have to check my passport? Yes, no. So it's not that simple. At the same time, if we compare the countries, the member countries of the European Union, we can see that some of them are richer than the others, and not a bit richer, quite richer than the others. So there is no such thing of equality in terms of economical power. And going to the next idea. If you satisfy a checklist, you can become a member of this club of states. And they are welcoming you, you satisfy the checklist, and they are saying you can join, and whenever you want, you can leave the club. Probably you remember what happened the beginning of this decade when Greece had the big crisis. They were trying to leave the EU because they realized that they couldn't pay the debt, and they said that they were leaving. And some other countries reacted really, really bad, and they said that they had to stay there, and if not, there would be consequences. For the next slide, I'm not going to say anything. You know what's happening, and I read today that the third deal of the Brexit has been rejected. So this is basically a nightmare for the UK, and we'll see if there are more consequences, especially in Ireland. So, European Union is quite cool also because they are promoting the respect of human rights, like human rights as belonging to minorities, non discrimination, tolerance, justice, solidarity, equality between women and men. But also, if you're checking the news in the Mediterranean, these human rights are not that covered. Immigrants from Africa or the refugees from Syria that they found the borders and they weren't letting them in Europe. Still, you can say, yeah, these people are not European, and these articles, these laws are protecting Europeans, not people coming from abroad. We see that the EU has been telling other countries that, hey, you should respect human rights, like in China with Tibet, and not to mention the never-ending situation in Ukraine with Russia. And also, you probably remember that plane that crashed because a missile from the Russian militia was shot, and there were a lot of people from the Netherlands, and the European Union didn't say anything, and they were citizens from the EU. So, yeah, not that good. Then, what happens if one of these countries doesn't respect human rights? Well, it's not very explicit what's happening, but the EU can give out to them. They are not specifying how, but they can take action. And if you remember Turkey, they were trying to, at some point a few years ago, they were trying to join the club of the European Union, and they weren't satisfying this checklist. So you can join us. Or recently with Poland and Hungary, that they were changing the laws, and it seemed that like the separation of powers was vanishing there, so Europe had to take action. But then we go to Catalonia, some politicians and leaders that try to organize the referendum. Catalonia, nowadays part of Spain. Spain is in the EU, and these people has been in prison since last year. Other cases, not only politicians, but other Catalan people that has had some kind of violation of human rights. We have Eric Bertran, probably you remember him. He sent some emails to companies that they weren't labeling in Catalan, and he was saying, hey, if you are not printing the labels in Catalan, I'm not going to buy more products from you. So after a few emails of that, he was sent to court with charges of terrorism. And recently with Tamara Carrasco and Adria Carrasco, which one is home in prison and the other is an exile in Belgium. After the referendum, basically they were charged with as terrorist actions, because one of them was sending an audio saying, hey, we should have a general strike, we should block roads, and the other was in a demonstration and was trying to mobilize the people. And yeah, well, before introducing the first of our panels, like we have Jordi. Jordi's like, he's not a politician, but he's a political and cultural activist. He has been has been taking part of the organization of the referendum. He's the president of Òmnium Cultural, an organization that promotes the Catalan culture, and actually has 162,000 members. And today we can say that he has been 529 days in prison without trial. To talk about him, we have Ed. Before starting the explanation, we have a video from him a few weeks ago when he was in court. He was so brave that he said,
mis declaraciones delante del juez instructor estaban vinculadas a una voluntad de salir de la prisión al precio que fuera. Y esta ya no es mi prioridad. Yo soy un preso político. Después de 500 días de cárcel, mi prioridad no es salir de prisión. Mi prioridad es poder denunciar el ataque y la vulneración que hay de derechos y libertades en Cataluña y en el conjunto del Estado español. Mi declaración delante del juez instructor fue condicionada al impacto emocional, que es muy grande cuando entras en prisión y cuando estás convencido de tu inocencia, como lo sigo estando hoy. Pero les insisto que mi prioridad es la absolución, obviamente, pero mi prioridad es la resolución del conflicto político entre Cataluña y España y la recuperación de derechos y libertades en el conjunto del Estado español. Mi prioridad ya no es salir de la cárcel como lo era anteriormente. Lo que sí que tengo claro, en todo aquello que hace referencia a la violencia, de la cual se nos acusaba y que yo negaba y sigo negando rotundamente, la única violencia del 1 de octubre, pero el 20 de septiembre no hubo ningún tipo de violencia, es la que ejercieron la Policía Nacional y la Guardia Civil el 1 de octubre. Sigo negando que desde la sociedad civil se ejerciera ningún tipo de violencia.
So, to talk about Jordi, we have Ed O'Donovan. He's the head of protection at the Frontline Defenders, and he's here to talk about Jordi.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you. I work with Frontline Defenders, which is an Irish-based organisation which works to protect and defend human rights defenders at risk all over the world. So anybody who is at risk because of their peaceful activities standing up for the rights of others. And we're more used to working in places outside of Western Europe, but over the last few years we've been monitoring with concern the situation in Spain. So I'm just going to touch briefly on what we've been, I suppose, seeing happening in Spain over the last couple of years before touching more specifically on the case of Jordi Cuixart. In late 2017, we coordinated an analysis of the challenges facing human rights defenders in Spain. So we got input from over 25 civil society organisations and asked them basically what were their everyday challenges in trying to carry out their peaceful human rights activities. And the list of threats we received back was quite startling. They included harassment, physical attack, police violence and mistreatment, smear campaigns, defamation, administrative sanctions, and criminalisation. And I think the way civil society space has shrunk in Spain over the last number of years has been encapsulated by the gag laws in 2015, which have criminalised certain forms of protest which have become quite popular in the preceding years. At the time, a number of independent UN experts said of the laws that they unnecessarily and disproportionately restrict basic freedoms such as the collective exercise of the right to freedom of opinion and expression in Spain. Now, this happening in Spain, a member country of the EU, as it's just been outlined, is quite startling to us. And it's led to, the laws themselves lead to huge fines imposed on people for certain types of protests. And as with all laws of this nature, and as we have seen in countries around the world, when they're imposed, they create a chilling effect across civil society, where people are less inclined to become social activists because of the threats that they face for standing up for the rights of others. And those who have been targeted, who we heard from, include women, human rights defenders, and feminist activists. They've been subjected to death threats online. We've seen those involved in the PA movement, the platform for people affected by mortgages, who have been using peaceful resistance to to oppose evictions, they have faced charges, including disobedience. And a number of their protest strategies, which have been quite successful since their founding in 2009, have been now criminalised, and as a result, civil disobedience has become much more difficult. We've also seen environmental rights activists being targeted. In 2017, there was a case where 28 Greenpeace activists were subjected to fines after protesting at the headquarters of an energy company in Madrid, denouncing their opposition to renewable energy. And these gag laws carry fines of between 600 and 30,000 euro. So it's a huge cost for people who are willing to get involved in this type of peaceful social protest and run the risk of personal bankruptcy or indeed organisational bankruptcy. As was mentioned in the introduction about migrants crossing the Mediterranean, in Spain, along with a number of other countries in Europe, unfortunately we've seen the criminalisation of humanitarian activities for those who are attempting to carry out search and rescue missions or coordinate search and rescue missions in the Med. There was a case of a Spanish woman who'd been living in Morocco who again was criminalised for these activities, and last year the Spanish Minister of Internal Development said that she was promoting irregular immigration and human trafficking through her humanitarian work in the Mediterranean Sea. And we've also seen an Irish citizen in last year in Greece being criminalised for similar activities. And just this week, unfortunately, we got the news that the EU was stopping its search and rescue missions in the Mediterranean. So against that, I suppose, broad, shrinking civil society space in Spain, we've also been paying attention to the situation in Catalonia, and specifically the case of Jordi Cuixart, who was mentioned as the president of a cultural rights organisation in Catalonia, and whose case we have taken up as we see as a human rights defender who's been targeted as a result of his peaceful activities in defence of human rights. We're extremely concerned by the fact that he's been charged with rebellion or sedition, and how this crime is being interpreted. Because he called for a demonstration, even though he explicitly called for peaceful behaviour and no violence, he's facing the charges that because so many people turned up, he should have known that there was a potential that some violence may occur. It's absolutely absurd, and the public prosecutor in November last year called for 17 years in jail, while I understand the state is calling for 8 years in jail. Now these are the types of sentences that we're more used to seeing in Burundi, in Turkey, in Iran, in Vietnam. It's absolutely astonishing to us that such a lengthy sentence is being demanded by public prosecutor and the state for someone who's engaged in the right to peaceful assembly and protest. A joint report by a number of special rapporteurs in 2016, when talking about how assemblies and protests should be managed, stated that while organisers should make reasonable efforts to comply with the law and to encourage peaceful conduct of an assembly, they should not be held responsible for the unlawful behaviour of others. And similarly, there was a case in the European Court of Human Rights in 2015 where a Russian activist had taken a case against Russia because he was being punished for an act of civil disobedience which had resulted in some public disorder. The court found that although the protest had involved some disturbance of public order, it had been largely non-violent and had not caused any bodily injuries. And the court highlighted the disproportionate sanction against the organiser, which had a deterring effect on protesters more generally. So the way Jordi is being targeted now as a human rights defender is also, I think, it speaks volumes about the hypocrisy of the Spanish state, because the foreign policy includes a policy on human rights defenders, supporting the activity of human rights defenders at an international level. Since 1998, they have hosted quite a good arrest and respite program in Madrid and one or two other cities, where they invite human rights defenders from other places in the world who are at risk to Madrid for a period of rest and respite. And since that program has begun over 20 years ago, they've had over 300 activists hosted in Spain, and doubtless some of those were at risk because they were organising peaceful protests in their countries of origin. It's also quite revealing. Just 2 weeks ago, there was an Iranian human rights lawyer who was sentenced to 38 years in prison and 148 lashes for her human rights activities, some of which involved assembly. And at that time, the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs put out a statement saying that the promotion of the legitimate activity of human rights defenders and their protection constitutes one of the priorities of the foreign policy of the government of Spain in the matter of human rights. They further said that the guarantee of freedom of expression and demonstration enshrined in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, of which Iran is a state party, is essential. Now, obviously Spain is also a state party to that convention, and a number of other international treaties governing human rights law which it has willingly signed up to. And I suppose the question I would have would be, if they feel that other activists around the world are entitled to protection under those conventions, why isn't Jordi Cuixart and others who are being criminalised for their peaceful assembly? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on to the next topic, which is kind of related. International justice. Maybe some of you have heard the Latin expression, which means "who watches Watchmen." We know that anyone with a bit of power can use this power in a wrong way. We have heard cases of corruption in the police, or even cases in trials that weren't fair. To fix these activities, we have two international courts that should help on that. First, the International Criminal Courts, which is based in The Hague in the Netherlands. Probably you heard of it. And as you can see, basically you can appeal when the national your country courts are unwilling or they are unable to prosecute criminal activities. On the other hand, we also have the European Court of Human Rights, and it's based in Strasbourg, in France. And these are the ones that are trying to fight for the human rights. When there is a violation of human rights, you can appeal the cases that failed in your own country in that court. Okay. This piece of news is from 3-4 days ago. Probably you saw it. A criminal from the Yugoslav wars was sentenced to a life sentence. The problem here is that we're in 2019. The Yugoslav wars finished 2001. 18 years later, we have a sentence. I think it's a bit late. I think so. Closer case is Arnaldo Tegui. He was one of the actors in the Basque peace process. He was having conversation with the terrorist band ETA, and he was trying to bring peace to the Basque country. Basically, the Spanish court said, you as political leader are talking to a terrorist band, and you are committing a crime. You should go to jail. He went to jail in 2009. He spent 6 years in jail. And then when his case was appealed in the European Court of Human Rights, they said, yeah, he committed no crime, so he should be released. But he lost his 6 years of his life. Recently, we have seen in the news that the cases brought to this court from Spain, 9 out of 10 of these cases were found as a violation of human rights. So 90%. This is like a really concerning number. You remember this banner poster? All the politicians, all the companies, everybody was with this banner. Basically, after the assassination of Charlie Hebdo, everybody was claiming for freedom of speech. It doesn't matter what you publish, what you say, you should be able to say what you think. And he was killed. Sometimes we may see things that we don't like, and we can criticize, we can try to argue with it in a civilized way. For example, we see one here that is comparing the Catalan movement, separatist movement, with the Nazi movement. Recently, also, the ex-minister of Spain was comparing the President Puigdemont with Hitler. This is in the news. And this other one, on TV, basically they were burning Catalan separatist flags because they didn't agree with the idea. And we also have here one of the victims of the violation of freedom of speech. He went on TV, he was interviewed, and he basically said that he didn't give a shit the unity of Spain. For that, he was taken to court. More recent cases, actually 2 days ago was in the news that 14 artists slash singers were taken to court for their lyrics because basically they are cursing or insulting national Spanish symbols. Other cases, like in the football matches, we see that Catalan people can bring the separatist flags, or even in the final match of Copa del Rey, people that were wearing yellow had to take off the clothes because they were not respecting neutrality. And to talk about this, we have one of the victims of the Spanish courts, Enrique, who probably he can explain better than me, but he was sent to jail for 15 months, and then he appealed to the European Court, and he was set free. So, talk about this, we have him.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I wasn't sent to jail. I had a sentence with 50 months. But well, first of all, it's my case, but I prefer to present it as the case of the anti-monarchists, the Republicans, because many people were involved in this case. And since it is what we had was a collective victory, so I think it's deserved to be called as the case of the Republicans or the monarchists, anti-monarchists. Well, to explain our story, we must go back to 2007, when the Spanish king visited our town in Girona to inaugurate the Science and Technology Park of the University of Girona, where he was invited by the authorities. Some of them were independencies, by the way. Many moons have passed since then. And as in previous experiences, social movements considered that the monarchy wasn't welcome in our town, and decided to rally and to express our repulse by setting fire to a large photograph of the royal couple placed upside down. The day after, we woke up with a big campaign given by the right and the far-right media. So this is the Mundo, and Jiménez Los Santos in the radio. And well, they were basically pointing at us and well, craving for revenge and repression. Sorry, that was a very important matter in Spain. We had burned pictures of the king, so everyone had to be worried about that. There were no other problems in the country, which in fact it has many problems. Spain, So we suddenly became their target. Perhaps things aren't very efficient in Spain, but when it comes to this matter, as I was saying, they certainly are. They are very efficient. And there is no separation of powers or human rights protection to slow it down. Press, the Spanish press has a big lack of plurality, that's well known. Politicians, judges, and police started to row together. Since we touch one of the holy matters of the Spanish state, the monarchy, the public opinion started to be merged and bombarded by images and articles that attempted to dehumanize us as persons. If someone is less human or an evil enemy, it is then easier to the public opinion, I guess, to understand that this someone has fewer rights. So then you are preparing the public opinion to accept something that you want to happen. Since we touched one of the holy matters of the Spanish state, the Audiencia Nacional quickly took our case and required us to state in court in Madrid. I shall digress here to tackle now the case of the Audiencia Nacional. The Audiencia Nacional is a court of exception, which is also an exception in Europe. It adds up to the Supreme Court and deals with the threats to Spain, the holy matters of the Spanish state, which can be, in our case, the monarchy or its unity. Its history goes back to 1977, when the Francoist Tribunal de Orden Público, on top, devoted to political repression, was transformed into this new court, the Audiencia Nacional, from night to day. Same judges, same legal framework applied from one day to the other. So same judges continued working there, and time went by, and nothing had changed. That's something you feel when you enter in the Audiencia Nacional. Even the furniture looks like you are 40 years ago, like in the Franco regime. Well, the Tribunal de Orden Público, was in turn created in 1963 as a continuation of the Special Court of Repression of Masonry and Communism. Some institutions, I would like to it's interesting, like in Spain, right? Some institutions in Spain have had the privilege of having a continuous life with different masks. So despite many political changes that happen in Spain, so they have had a continuity over time, like the Audiencia Nacional, which is a very clear case. Well, we went to Madrid to testify, and since we had nothing to hide, we told the judge that we burned those pictures and that we would do it again and again. A big wave since then of solidarity quickly rose up, and thousands of people burned more pictures, not only in Girona, but in the rest of the Catalan countries. The judge of the Audiencia Nacional, Fernando Grande Marlaska, said that he wanted everyone who attended these demonstrations in the Plaza del Vin, Girona, in our case, to be judged in his court, Fernando Grande Marlaska. The Catalan police, Mossos d'Esquadra, reacted very efficiently and identified many activists. Dozens and dozens of people were charged of insulting the crown, injuries to the crown, and had to go to court in Madrid. Just to let you know who is Fernando Grande Marlaska. He's the current interior minister by the Socialist Party, PSOE, and he recently stated that in Spain, nobody is in jail for opinions or ideas. The same guy that a few years ago was saying that everyone who was demonstrating had to go to his court. No shame. Journalists and photographers, like Jordi Ribot, a photographer from the newspaper El Punt, were also called by the judges, Fernando Marlaska, and they were forced to give their images to the court to identify everyone involved in the protest. If not, they would be charged of disobedience, insubordination, which can be punished with charges of up to 1 year in prison. The day of our trial arrived, and we quickly noticed that it was a complete show. Our judge, in our case, was José María Vázquez Onrubia, who was aware that our trial attracted the attention of the media, didn't allow us to testify in Catalan, in what I would describe as a flagrant case of open Catalanophobia perpetrated by a public institution. Our judiciary defense then became basically voided by linguistic issues. But we remained firmly speaking in Catalan, even though that we knew that our defense would be voided. So the judge read the sentence in voce, so right in the end of the trial, which is basically insulting because this made us evident that the sentence was already written before the trial. We were convicted of insulting the Spanish crown, 15 months of prison, and a fine of 2,700 euros. We presented an appeal against the sentence, alleging a clear defenselessness in the trial. We won the appeal. We repeated the trial months later with another judge, but the sentence we got was basically the same. And we could speak in Catalan. That's something that was a small victory. And then they didn't like it, like no wonder I put the portrait of me because they didn't like that I had a T-shirt in Catalan in the trial. Well, just to let you know, a while later, the same judge, Vázquez Onrubia, who dealt with our case, sentenced the chief executive officers of the bank Caixa Penedès, those who stole 29 million euros, to similar condemns of 1 or 2 years prison. So how justice deals with different things. We appealed to the highest authority in Spain, the Constitutional Court, arguing a violation of the free speech. This court, which has been proven to respond in hours in some political causes, stored our appeal inside the drawer for 7 years until 2015. As we expected, they ratified the Audiencia Nacional sentence, and we appealed again to the higher authorities, the European Court of Human Rights. In March 2018, last year, the European Court of Human Rights condemned Spain unanimously. It ratified what was obvious for us, that we have the right to political participation and that critical message can be expressed in the framework of a democracy. That's obvious. That in no case can the critical expression with the monarchy be understood as a personal attack, but as it is the right to dissent towards the head and symbol of the Spanish state and commander-in-chief of its armed forces. Well, one of the main conclusions of our case is that when political trials are faced politically, they can become a political weapon with a powerful boomerang effect against the state that is accusing you. Spain started to have a problem. Despite the censorship, people started to openly notice what was an evidence. El rei anava despullat, the king was naked, as the famous tale describes. Just to finish my intervention, I would like to raise a few conclusions. First issue I would like to raise to the audience is the role of the Catalan police, the Mossos d'Esquadra. Their conflict in preserving fundamental rights versus repressing them when they collaborate with the Spanish justice. The Mossos d'Esquadra quickly handed brilliant investigation reports which incriminated us with hundreds of pages to the judges of the Audiencia Nacional. They spent big efforts in prosecuting us. They militarized my town several times in order to stop our demonstrations and frighten the citizens. Police cars were parked in front of my house day and night. Our phone was clearly tapped and tracked. What was the economical cost of this repression? When we say that we want to construir la república, to build a new republic, I think of public institutions that preserve fundamental rights rather than repress them. A second thought I would like to raise is how easy the far right tunes the public opinion in biased justice in Spain. It has mechanisms to quickly force press, politicians and judges to act as a function of its interest. A third issue I would like to raise is that fundamental rights are usually correlated and not isolated. In conditions when a fundamental right is violated, it is very likely that many other rights will be threatened as well, as the right of assembly and demonstration or linguistic rights in our case. A fourth issue is that we, the grassroots movements, have the duty to cultivate resilient mechanisms to face political repression. Political repression needs to be seen as a whole. We need to interconnect rather than compete with different struggles in order to build strong networks of solidarity. A fourth conclusion is that there are no magic formulas to defeat repression, so no jugadas maestras. Chances to win emerge only if political repression is faced politically. And last but not least, I would like to raise the question is, what is the value of winning 11 years later, as in our case? I believe people in Catalonia are a bit obsessed with the European Court of Human Rights. I think that the political victory goes far beyond than the sentences of this court, and preserving fundamental rights is in our hands rather than the international court. If we hadn't had the decision to disobey the rules, basically basic rights would have been violating during these years, despite the fact that some years later, an international court would have agreed with us. Well, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick, for your witness. So, we are moving from one human right to another, self-determination. This is a map from before the World War I. As you can see, it's a completely different map than today. There are some countries that are still there, but one example, United Kingdom takes the whole island plus Ireland. And there are two big empires in the middle of Europe and another one in the east. This is another one from after the World War II, with some differences, more countries. Ireland has its own country there, but it's not still like today. We can see the Republic of Yugoslavia there, and Spain was still a dictatorship. If you can see the flag was a bit different. Germany was divided into two. There were some differences. And this is the map nowadays. You can see that we have a lot of countries in the south now. We have Croatia, we have Bosnia, we have Serbia, Slovenia. In the north, we have the Baltic countries. We have Ukraine and Belarus. More countries appeared. Sad thing is that how did it appear? So if we check the Charter of United Nations, one of the articles that you can read there is about self-determination as a right. And not only the Charter of Human Nations, other conventions are also talking about it. Here, another one, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is also saying that the self-determination is a right. However, we are seeing a lot of cases in documents, but are there real cases that happen without the war? Because in Europe, has a long history, but a lot of wars, and all the countries are coming from wars. We have an example in Quebec in 1995 that they tried to separate from Canada. They had a referendum, and Quebec lost. So, as a result, we have one Canada and not Canada and Quebec. Another example closer to us is Scotland in 2014. That they also had a referendum, agreed with the United Kingdom. And they lost, and Scotland is still part of the UK. To talk about self-determination, we have Albert. He's an Irish and Catalan solicitor here in Dublin, and he's an expert in human rights, so he can explain a little bit more about self-determination.
Gracias. You sound duas vezes. I would like it to be in a broken sea, because there's a beautiful Romanesque monastery near Moya called Santa Maria de Lluçà, and I think the name comes. There is a hill, and I think the etymological origin is that hill. Was called Lluçà. It comes from lux. There was a nice view, a nice light, but no, my surname initially was with one S in the 1970s until the 1970s, and it was only with the introduction enactment of linguistic legislation under the government of Jordi Pujol that actually it may have been legislation of the Spanish government, but it became possible to what we call normalize the language. So we then all changed it to two S's. It wasn't our choice to spell it in one S. That was the choice of the Spanish civil servants, whenever that was in the 19th century, but all names had to be Castellanized. And I wonder whether that is an element of proof, a possible evidence of the argument that Catalonia is a colonized people. Because the answer, or an assimilated people, because the answer to this question has a lot to do with the right of self-determination, or the right to self-determination. Because I don't know if Catalonia is a people. I suspect that most of us would think that it is. But when I was, it's one of my earliest memories, when I was maybe 4, 5, 6, 7, but it was in the 1970s, and I'm not sure if General Franco had died yet, or was about to die, but I remember that one of the questions, and I don't have a good memory at all, but is Catalonia a people? Is it a country? And to give you a little bit of context, I don't like to talk about myself, but I'm from Manresa, a city, a small city, a town in the center of Catalonia. My parents were both born in Manresa in 1926 and 1927, before the Spanish Civil War, so-called. And my father's mother came from Almeria in the 1920s, so it's a very old wave of immigration. She died in 1943. I never met her, or 44, of cancer. But obviously she was very Andalusian. My father's father was from Manresa, a trader, very humble origins, shop in the city. His father had it. My mother's parents were both born in Catalonia, one in the city center, Carrer Ciutat of Barcelona, middle-class lady, my grandmother Teresa, and my mother's father was a self-made entrepreneur, cultural activist, Ramon Torra, in Manresa, and set up a printing factory, or bought rather, and then a cultural activist magazine called Ciutat, which published the avant-garde of Catalan writers at the time. I don't remember personally now who they were, but a man who felt strongly about the language and culture. And then the Civil War came, of course, and many had to flee as refugees to Europe and to America. The country was, I'm told, traumatized again. And it's funny how what is happening now, Clara will know this much better than I do. It's an extraordinary how history repeats itself. It is absolutely fascinating how the political developments that we have seen in the last 10 years or 5 years seem to me to mirror so accurately what happened in the 1930s and that led to the Civil War. Of course, as Enrique Villa told me, I just sent him a WhatsApp message. Sorry for name dropping here, but I'm a very strong Twitter follower of Enrique, because he's a brave, crazy man. I'm sure Clara will agree. And I said, look, what can I say that it's relatively positive today, because I feel everything but positive. And I haven't suffered personally in a real effective way the price that Enrique first had to pay, having to go to that, what's the accurate adjective for that court, the Audiencia Nacional, the High Court, that appalling place, and Clara herself, who is, as we speak, paying a personal, very, very important price. I want to use this opportunity. I would like you all who voted or wanted to vote on the 1st of October to join me in saying thank you for putting yourself there and defending our rights, my rights to self-determination, and you are paying the price. It's very easy for us to pontificate and to speak but it's quite embarrassing, really. So thank you. Enric Vila, yes. I said, what can I say that is optimistic, because I only have negative things to say. I'm pessimist and negative by nature, so this is a great time for this. But I know that's not the right thing to do. So I said, Enric, I've only met him once, by the way, but we follow, today's Twitter and social media. It's like we're best friends, because I just like what he says, and he's crazy. But he's very intelligent, and he sees reality and history in a way that very few people do. Now, another crazy horse that I'm not allowed to mention his name, but I will, only to make a point only. We need to try to be independent in our minds. And there are people who think and speak truths that are difficult to listen to, but we need to try to make room for them. It's Salvador Sostres. I'm sorry to say his name, but it's important we try to be alert and open and hear those voices that are brave. And I sued Salvador Sostres. I hired a lawyer because I thought he had defamed me personally in a tweet in his blog. But anyway, he's irrelevant. I don't want to give him more time, but Enric Vila and Salvador happen to be friends as far as I know. But Enric, I said, what can I say that is positive? And he said, well, and that links with what I was saying about the civil war. He says, well, the difference is that now Spain cannot use war and violence as a means of economic progress, which was the case in the world up until the Cold War. And they can decapitate political leadership through the courts and deprive us of our political representatives, our politicians. But because they cannot send the army, because Article 7 of the Treaty on the European Union would lead to the expulsion of Spain from the European Union. Spain is not fully independent, even though they think they are, or they wish they were. They can get rid of our political class, but they can't send the tanks, and they can't massacre us. So he said that it's just a matter of time before new leaderships will come up. Well, I hope so. I hope so, because I was brought up in a family that, rightly or wrongly, thought that the cause of Catalonia was a worthy cause. And I think most of us, at least I do, what I mean by that is the worth of the Catalan language. Because I know many of us, and my grandmother and many are of course, Spanish speakers, and it's as deserving of respect a language as any other Spanish, and I have nothing against it objectively. But as a Catalan speaker, the language, and I think for most of us, is very important. And a Catalonia that lost its language, but became an independent country, as it has been the case with Ireland. It's a second question that I have, not when I was 10 years old or 7, but I do have it since I came here many years ago. What would I prefer? An independent Catalonia that lost the language, or the ridiculous, pathetic little country that we have, but that has proudly and relatively efficiently maintains the memory of our ancestors, the way we look at the world, the way we relate to the world, how we speak, I think it's a treasure that defines us more than anything else, apart from our industriousness or the way that we don't buy rounds when we go to the pub, and it's just a language. So that all has to do more or less with the right to self-determination, because the right of self-determination, I'm not an expert. I practice in immigration law and asylum law, and I did a master's in human rights law, but I'm not an expert. But if you want to understand what the right of self-determination is under international law, you just need to read one paper, which is not very long, by Alfred de Zayas, who is a former independent expert of the United Nations on the promotion of, it's very long, the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order. So Mark in his presentation referred to Article 1 of the CUN, that's the Charter of the United Nations. And as he says in this paper, it's not very long. It was published in August 2014. It's an interim report to the Secretary General of the United Nations. The Charter of the United Nations is the world's constitution. We all know about the Spanish Constitution and how sacred and important it is and how it cannot be broken. Well, the world's constitution is the Charter of the United Nations. And from there, that's the cornerstone of the international legal system. Now, I think, and I am speaking for myself, I won't be much longer because I know there's a lot of things to do. But I think another thing that defined us Catalans is, at least I'm speaking for myself, even though I studied law, which is a ludicrous fact, really, considering that all I was doing before going to college was singing and doing music. But I think many of us, before all this happened, had no idea what actually the law meant. I wonder how many of the members of the government who took that risk, who took that gamble, I think as Clara once referred to, really knew what they were up against. And this is a perverse understanding and application of what the law is the rule of the law rather than the rule by the law, which becomes tyrannical because it breaches fundamental rights, in this case, the right to self-determination. And going back, Article 1 of the Charter of the United Nations, the Constitution of the world, speaks of the right of self-determination of all the peoples. It is also mentioned in Article 1, as the slide from Mark said, the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Social and Economic and Cultural Rights. They are international treaties signed by the majority of the states of the United Nations. Spain, they are published in the BOE, the Spanish legislative the bulletin, and they are part of the Spanish legal system since 1978. So this is the legal basis. There is a right to self-determination under international law. It's called self-determination. This paper by Mr. Desayas says very interesting things. Apart from telling you the history of it, it says it is a right that should be promoted and facilitated by the international community because it's a peace-promoting mechanism. It's a conflict-avoiding mechanism. It's a way of resolving conflicts that avoid the conflict and violence and so on. And Spain did sign up to this. It's an international obligation to respect it, to promote it. The problem with much of international law, not all of it, but some of it, is that while it is there, while it is law, it is the law, it must be obeyed. There's no one there to say you must obey, and if you don't, we'll send you the Guardia Civil, or we'll send you the judges, because there's no enforcing mechanism under international law. That's one of the things that Desayas is also suggesting, some form of mediation. Finally, briefly, just to say, if I remember, the point I wanted to make is that, yes, two things. One is, we have in Catalonia since 1981, since 1960, we have been exercising a right of self-determination with a dialogue and consent with Spain, arguably until 2010. In 2010, that ended with the sentence, the judgment of the Constitutional Court, which deprived us of our voice. We had spoken in a referendum, we had signed up to a Statute of Autonomy, the Constitutional Court decimated it. That was a breach of the social contract. Up until then, there had been an exercise, it's called the internal right of self-determination. Different levels of federalism, autonomy, they are agreed. This is an expression of the right of self-determination. Secession is also an expression of the right of self-determination, and it's as legitimate as the other ones. in certain circumstances. Now, the case that we had as Catalans is, well, we have tried up until 2010, or from 2010, to negotiate something, a new relationship, a new constitutional understanding between Spain and Catalonia, and as we all know, they said no, 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 no. Then, thanks to the 2015 elections, the 27th of September, the elections, they were won by Junts per Catalunya. They said, we're going to go ahead with self-determination. And in November of 2015, a very important resolution was enacted, the 9th of November, on the anniversary of the fall of Berlin Wall. You know, Mas also made that analogy, comparison. They said on the 9th of November, the Parliament, our Parliament, we voted them, we asked them to do this, and they said, yes, we will. We're going ahead, and we are going to disobey the resolutions of the Constitutional Court. And they did. But I think most of them thought, well, we'll get done by disobedience. We might get barred from running for public office. We might get a few months in prison. I don't know you. I'd like to ask you this, Clara. Did anybody really think that they would go after you for rebellion and sedition? It's just so shocking. It's so disgusting. But the last thing I want to say is, before the referendum, what did Rajoy say? Esto no es un referendum, right? And what do most of Spain say? You are not a people. You are not a people. You don't have the rights to independence. You're not a people. You're part of us. We assimilated you. You're Spanish. And they may be right from their point of view. That's what I was saying about listening. They have their truth. We think, oh no, we are a people. We have these rights. We did go ahead. We organized ourselves in the referendum of independence. Now they've persecuted us. And what are we saying? No. We didn't. It really wasn't a referendum. We signed it outside the Parliament. We didn't publish it in the Diari Oficial de la Generalitat. It's all about fundamental human rights. It's all about freedom of. Enric, you spoke in Catalan in the Audiencia Nacional. Did you? I think you deserve an applause as well. But I don't understand, and with all due respect again to the price that Jordi is paying, that good men, good women, acting in good faith, trying to serve the people, they don't deserve any of it. But that we wouldn't even have the decency or the strength of character to speak in Catalan, I don't understand this. And that's when I think maybe we're not a people, we've just been too assimilated. So the only good thing is that because they are persecuting our politicians for rebellion and sedition, it seems now, they think now that we're a people who were exercising the right of self-determination. But we're saying, no, we are not, and we didn't vote for it, you know. And also another example, well, I won't go there. But, you know, it's just that, see, no, yes, so, no, that's all. Catalonia has the right of self-determination. It has tried to exercise it, I think, as an attempt to negotiate a resolution of a conflict with Spain. Obviously, Spain is stronger, and what we should have done, I think, is on the 3rd of October, proclaim the results of the referendum in accordance with Article 2 of the law on referendum enacted on the 6th of September of 2018 by the Parliament, and all of us stayed on the streets week after week after week after week and suffer the consequences of half of our country turning against us and create the havoc and pay the price with our blood. If we weren't willing to do that, I don't think it was worth it. Because we've, as your other friend Jordi said yesterday, we've burned the main two weapons or cards that we had for a generation, I think for 40 years. The right of organizing an effective and efficient referendum on self-determination and the possibility of declaring a unilateral declaration of independence, of activating. There's no politician who's going to go with that anymore, because we won't believe them. But we were waiting for this all our generation. Sorry. The last thing is, since we were in 1980s, we were asking and we wanted you guys to do what you did, and for us, we owe you an immense gratitude. So thank you.
Thank you, Albert, for your insights. The typo wasn't on purpose. Sorry for that. And I should also give you thanks because he introduced a lot of ideas for the next part. So we are now taking all these ideas that they have been exposed, and we are putting them together. I will have our last panelist. Just probably we can go with that because Albert has been introducing a lot of these ideas. Catalonia, old nation since the Middle Ages. It was part of the Crown of Aragon that joined the dynasty of Castilla. Then, from that moment on, Catalans have never been considered as nation by Spanish rulers. And after the fascist dictatorship, they gave back the Catalan institutions, but with restricted powers. So, as Albert mentioned, everything broke in 2010 when they didn't respect the democratic result of a referendum. Politicians, all of them agreed that they needed to upgrade the law. 88% of the parliament voted in favor of that. There was a referendum. Almost 74% of the people who participated in this referendum agreed. But then everybody in Spain went crazy. The government, the courts, like this can be too much power for the Catalans. So basically, the Spanish government rejected this change, and from that moment on, 2010, 2012, million of people in the streets. 2013, like a huge line connecting the whole country from the north to the south. Demonstrations every single year. 2014, Spanish authorities weren't listening to us. There was like a huge, Albert mentioned it, the huge live poll to prove that there is a lot of people that want independence. So Spanish authorities, please sit and negotiate a solution of this. Nothing. 2015, 2016, and then the referendum that the Catalan government organized, and we have like maybe we can play like a little bit of what happened in that what happened that day.
Qui es va partir la cara? El poble de Catalunya, els catalans i les catalanes. Ningú no ens ha regalat res.
That's Jordi Cuixart.
Aquest país ha demostrat que és imparable quan anem junts.
So as you can see, a lot of people, elder people, young people, everybody going for this referendum. The result is here. 90% of the voters went for yes. A lot of no supporters tried to boycott the referendum, saying that it was an official referendum, this is not legal, etc. So since there is their part wasn't there, they say that it shouldn't be taken into account. And to talk about this, it's an honor for us to have the former Minister of Education, Clara Ponsatí, that she's going to tell us a little bit before the questions what they tried to do in the Catalan government. They knew that they had a problem because the Spanish authorities weren't listening, but they pushed for the referendum. So I'm going to take the microphone here.
Good evening, and thank you very much for having me here. Thank you to the other panelists for being here and for their very insightful presentations. I'm going to be very brief because I suspect we need to save some time for the audience to have an opportunity, and we've been talking quite a bit so far on this side. And I'm not much of a lecturer when it comes to politics. I would like just to review a little bit the facts that have to do with human rights. I'll be happy to answer the kind of questions that you were raising if I try, I'll try. But I'd like to review a little bit the facts after the referendum. The referendum did take place. It took place under extreme violent aggression by the police, but in spite of that, the people of Catalonia were there. They were voting. They were defending the ballots. You know, we could count more than 2 million and several. Okay, I don't remember the exact figure, but you know, it was a big number. And basically, when one thinks of self-determination, I mean, it's an abstract concept. But when you see these pictures, that is self-determination. In a very alive way. You know, some people are trying to hit you so that you don't decide what you want to do with your country, but you're there and you decide it no matter. Catalans, as you were saying, have self-determined, a long history, and that was a landmark of our history of self-determination. And I think that as far as I am concerned, and I am only speaking for myself, just make this very clear, I'm an independent and I remain so. As far as I am concerned, I feel obliged by the mandate of the people of Catalonia on October 1st. Obliged, then, what can I do? That's a different question. But that I feel a moral obligation to, that my political action is inspired and moved to respond to this obligation. That I think it's, in my case, there is no doubt about that. I think that this is in general the feeling of all the people that have that are in exile, of people that join the Council of the Republic, President Puigdemont, and so on. Okay, so I think that a different matter is how do we do that? How do we deliver on that obligation? Because it's very clear that we were obliged on October 1st evening to do what you're suggesting. To my surprise, and I must confess, I discovered on that evening that was not what anybody else was thinking. So, in a way, I think that part of it had to do with the fact that the very strong determination of Catalans on October 1st surprised everyone. And I think that we need to be aware that it did surprise the people in the government, the organizers, but it also surprised you. So let's be honest it was a surprise for everybody. So the lack of mental preparation, which is basically the most important part of the lack of preparation, was a general problem. So I think that when it's very legitimate to criticize leaders when they fail us. That's okay. I think we have to do it, and that's why we have electoral processes, so that we substitute them. Somehow it's not that easy, but we did it, and some of them change and adapt, and so there is a process of leadership renewal. But it's important that we realize that our leaders, whoever they are us. So the quality of our leadership, the intelligence, the courage, I think it shows the average performance in our community, in our society. So I think we can be as critical as we want of the government, of the people who stand in trial, of the people who are in exile, but they are very similar to people here or in Barcelona, people who are in private business, in schools, and so on. So it's not, there is nothing exceptional about the personal character of these individuals. I mean, we all wish we had, inspiring leaders that would really, help us into figuring out what to do next, and, who had insight and who would, take the people and deliver independence, take us across the Red Sea, no problem. But I'm afraid that this is something that we're going to have to do, more on a learning by doing basis. And the way of Catalans towards independence is a unique one. All independences are unique. But ours, we are, we don't have an instruction books. There is no manuals for that, and beyond, we can be very critical of how we have got up to here, but well, we've got up to here, okay? And so I think that it's important that we realize that we've made substantial progress. So, okay, we can be, you can always think of the glass half full or half empty. You see it half empty. I rather see it half full, especially today. I mean, I have bad days as well. Huh? But I think that, that we need to realize we've got up to here, and now, within the, our case is a case on the table of Europe, and it would not be a case in the table of Europe if we were all if instead of being 12 people in the Supreme Court sitting on those, terrible furniture, if it was everybody there, right? So at least some of us had the whatever, at least we were out, and we stayed out, and we faced justice in other places than Spain, and we have very vividly proved to anyone who is impartial that what's going on in Spain is an outrage in terms of human rights, procedural law. They are just breaking, all the limits of what a rule of law would require. And that's, and I can say it, that wouldn't be very powerful because I'm part in this, but it's not me who's saying it, or, it's a court in Germany that has very explicitly said it. So you look at the facts, and they see the facts with one description. You will see what Mr. Marchena will write at the end of this dreadful process, and you can compare, and at the end of the day, the European public opinion, the international democratic opinion is going to be comparing these things, and that is powerful, and that will certainly, put Spain to a very, difficult, to a very difficult situation, and the fact that they are facing this, this very difficult situation, we're already seeing it. The way they have reacted, the way they react to international public opinion expressing some doubts about what's going on in Spain. It's the proof that they really are not, that solid. And the fact that they are very, very strong doesn't mean that we cannot overcome that. Okay, so can we be optimistic? What's this idea that, okay, well, yeah, now they cannot send us the tank. Well, I'm not sure they wouldn't, really. And, considering the level of decay of Spain as the institutional rottenness of the system, I'm not sure. So if there is another, situation in which Catalans take to the streets and we again challenge the Spanish state, and we carry on, which is, I think, a necessary condition if we want to make this happen. I'm not sure that the army will stay in the barracks, that they won't act violently. So on that, and I'm not sure Europe will react by triggering Article 7. We'll see. I mean, it's just, we need to try, but at this point, I think the situation at this point is, the political organizations are not yet offering proposals that can move us forward in a substantive way. We have an election. The way we've reacted to that election is just is dreadful, right? Because you have an election in Spain, of course. I mean, if you are an articulate and functional political movement, well, you just put up a list and prove to the world that more than 50% of the Catalans are supporting what they voted on October 1st. So the inability of our political parties to put differences aside and to organize this for the Spanish election, for the municipal elections. We'll see what happens in the European elections, but things don't look that good. So this is, it's in a way, yes, when I think of that, I become pessimist. But, well, we need to be, we need to be patient, and we need to develop instruments of hope. And I think that if one thing we've done, if I can now, I allow myself to speak on terms of, on the name of the exiles. I think that one thing we've done during this year and a half now, is that we've provided hope. And I think that hope is indispensable, and I wish we can continue to provide it. Thank you.
So now it's time for questions and answers. I'm going to give the microphone to them, and from here probably I'll try to moderate the questions, but you can decide who you want to ask to.
Clara, thank you very much. I have some friends in Barcelona who, I'd like you to put your economist hat on, who tell me, and I don't read it in the papers, but they say that Spain is this close to to bankruptcy, that every month this EU is funneling millions and millions of euros into, and I don't read this in the paper, but some people who are very bright, you think you know their friends, you may know them as well, and they tell me this, and I just don't read it, but they say that that this is going to stop, that the European Union has told them that there's a limit to what they're going to subsidize. Do you know anything? Is this true? Do you know anything about this?
I'm an economist, but I'm not an expert on debt and macroeconomics and so on. Spain is a country under serious debt, yes. Does this mean, this doesn't mean that Europe is paying huge amount, no. There is no flow, it's just a matter of how the European Central Bank is managing the situation, which does not only apply to Spain. I mean, Italy and France are in very similar situations. So I wouldn't count on on that resolving our problems. Let's put it this way.
Do you think, do you think that the sentences, all the people that have been tried in Spain, so the sentences are going to be like a tipping point, like a momentum that is going to give more.
No. Honestly, I wish, but I think that Spaniards are extremely good at managing tempos, whereas so far we haven't been that good at managing tempos, and just this, this explicitly sort of basing your strategy on waiting to see what happens in the trial and what the sentences are is, now I put my game theory hat on, which is this one I wear it more. It's a dominated strategy. So it's a very bad strategy to say, well, let's wait and see what the strategy what the sentences are, because I mean, first thing, they can go on and on forever. And in the meantime, the public opinion is not looking. I mean, we're all, I suppose some of you at least, I must confess that we're addict to following the detail of the trial and this, what this policeman said and this Guardia Civil and this and that, and we comment it every day as if it was the last soap opera, but that's not the general attention. So there is no tension here. I think we seriously need to try to work up some strategy, and that requires us talking to each other, as I mean the political parties and so on, and the elections will play some sort of clarifying role, we'll see. Because depending on the support that each gets, it turns out that the thesis of we're not enough, so we need to wait another decade, and in this new decade we will tell Catalans that independence is good for them, and then once we have enough Catalans that if that independence is good for them, then we'll think about how to do it, which is one strategy. If that strategy gets a lot of support, well, then that means that we certainly don't have enough support for independence right now, and that we need to be patient. And there is not much need to think about organizing civil disobedience to take the next step to independence. So we'll see.
With regards to the momentum after the sentence, I see in the political leaders, the current political leaders in Catalonia, that there are big interests now to slow it down, I would say. I mean, it can happen that we will all win momentum as a grassroots movement, as the independentist movement has always been, has been a grassroots movement. But I do see that the main leaders that are now ruling Catalonia are not interested in setting fire, let's say, to the conflict. So I think this is the reality. Well, we have to face this. So, and I would like the politicians to be more honest and explain it as it is. Perhaps there are reasons to slow this down, but they should explain this. They shouldn't lie to the population, and then this would help to avoid this frustration that I think exists now in Catalonia.
I think from an international perspective, if lengthy sentences are handed down, I do think it would have the impact of mobilising European civil society to a great degree. I've been quite surprised generally that this issue has not really been on the agenda amongst European human rights and civil society organisations, and similarly there isn't a Catalan presence at a lot of those international European meetups talking about, for instance, shrinking civil society space. And if lengthy sentences are handed down, I do think unfortunately there would be an opportunity to use them as a means to really push this issue onto the agenda.
I have maybe one question for you, Ed, on the, well, you mentioned like situation in Europe where political activists have been facing trials, but are there really like similar cases to the one of Enrique where somebody gets like accused and goes to trial for innocent things like morning pictures? Or is this really comparable? And then the second one I would have is, what about the Irish speaker rights? So would that work on Ireland? Would you be able to declare in Irish?
On the first case, in Enrique's case, the closest I've seen is in Thailand, where they have the lèse majesté law, which is a law criminalising saying anything bad about the king. So, as a simple example, the king faces on a coin, so if you drop a coin and if you put your foot down to stop it, you could be prosecuted because you're stamping on the king's head. And to me, that's the same level of ridiculousness that burning a picture would put you in prison for. For your second question, can you elaborate?
On Irish Gaelic, if you would be able to speak in court here in
Ireland. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So
I mean, it's an official language in Ireland, so if you want to...
Are judges obliged to know it, or is it would it be a translation?
I'm not an expert in this, but as far as I know, you have the absolute right to defend yourself in Irish if you want to, and they would find a judge you'd be able to speak in Irish to hear your case.
Thank you.
It was mentioned that in 2010 it was the year when the exercise of self-determination through its internal manifestation ended. But could we say that it was actually when the Article 155 got applied?
I think I made that point myself, so I'll just elaborate. It wasn't actually, this is what's his name, Javier, the constitutional law expert, Pérez Arroyo, I think, yes. He has been saying, this is very interesting, I think. He says, look, the Spanish Constitution of 1978 is a contract, in this case, more or less, between Spain and Catalonia. And in 2006, the Catalan Parliament approved a new Statute of Autonomy that was ratified in the Spanish courts. It was voted in referendum by the Catalan people, and then the Constitutional Court broke the pact. So I think it is from then on that the Catalan governments pretend, I think they pretend, because they're just going through the motions, but they know they're going nowhere. So Mas tries to achieve a fiscal pact when he knows he won't get anything, and I don't know what other attempts are made, but it's going nowhere until 2015 when they say, well, we have to go somewhere, so let's go for a unilateral declaration of independence and a referendum. So to answer your question, the Article 155, which de facto continues, in my view, to be in place, because the media now can't even say certain words. Did you know that, Ed?
No.
the Catalan media have been banned from using the term political prisoner and exile. So that's
because the election.
Because which hasn't yet been, I think, we're not yet an electoral term, are we? But the Electoral Commission is already saying to the Catalan media what words can or can they not use. So the 155 is there. It's just the threat. It's just the knowledge that if you take a step, they're coming after you. So I think it ended in 2010 because the constitutional pact was broken. According to Perez Royo, and I think that's a very persuasive argument. We thought we had voted, and you know how important that is, because I think it was Article 1 of the 2006 Statute of Autonomy, not just the preamble. It was left in the preamble, but I didn't read it in full, but I remember Article 1 of the Statute of Autonomy of 2006 did say Catalonia is a nation. And if that had, of course, we all knew, I knew, well, we all knew that would never pass the test of the Constitutional Court. But if it had been, then our exercise, well, anyway, so in my opinion, it ended in 2010. That's how I see it.
Hello. Usually I would like to ask you, this. What's happened 1 October in the night time with the police, with the Catalan police? They were prepared to do something. The next day, the politicians said to them to...
No idea.
No idea. Cannot answer that.
No idea. I'm honestly answering. No idea. I don't know.
So they didn't.
I have no idea. Have I been clear? I was the Minister of Education, by the way.
Yeah, it's a similar question. What is your narrative on the discussions within the Catalan government between the 1st October and the eventual, very particular declaration of independence? Is it true that, as some claim, the real point of, that was being discussed was when to call for elections?
Yeah, I mean, this has been explained in several occasions, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so you see that.
That's
right. Thanks.
Maybe for Ed, would you know why Spanish state seems to be getting almost like special treatment from the EU as to they're not seeming to fight against them for human rights, even though it's explicit that they're breaking a lot of human rights, whereas Turkey and etc. are getting punished?
Yeah, well, I guess you have to look at the EU as a club, and it can be quite difficult for one member state to hold another member state to account, depending on their historical relationship. For instance, now, in the context of Brexit, I know the Irish government would be very slow to say anything to the Spanish government that might annoy them, which might lead to Spain withdrawing support for the Irish position on the border, and that's just one example. And I think you'll probably find that in a lot of other countries as well. So unfortunately, it's the nature of politics.
I'd like to ask Clara and Enrique if you think that it would be a good idea for the pro-independence forces in Catalonia to say have the equivalent of a Scottish National Party, or the old Sinn Féin of 1917 here, from 1917 to 1921, where you ironed out the differences behind closed doors and then presented a united front to the world. Is it possible? And do you think it's a good idea? And B, is it possible?
Well, there have been big attempts in Catalonia to create like a unified independentist party, let's say, with the Esquerra Republicana, PDeCAT, but I think this hasn't worked that well from our yeah. I am more in favor of unity front with regards to the strategy, because the independentist movement is very plural in Catalonia. There are like left wing, right wing. I mean, it's very plural. That's reality.
I wasn't talking about the coup.
Yeah.
They would never. I'm talking about basically the Esquerra and the PDCAT. You know.
So, I'm more in favor about the strategic front rather than unifying parties. I think this doesn't work because parties in Catalonia have still the mentality of the regime of the 1978. Let's say they want in the end they're interested in not changing everything. They have big frictions to change things because in the end they have their positions in the power and I think this wouldn't work.
I mean, if it's just a matter of wish, of course, I think it would be great to have, a political organization, you may call it a party or not, that unified all the independentist coast. So I have no reservation here. The fact that we're very plural and that Enrique is very lefty and I'm a liberal, I don't think that's relevant for what we need to do right now. Honestly, I don't think it has any relevance whatsoever. So in principle, yes, why not? However, the fact is that we don't, and what are the reasons? I share the opinion with Enrique that this is being impossible. This is being made impossible in great part because political parties are enterprises of distribution of benefits, and as such, they need to maintain this activity. They have, once you get posts in parliament or in the city councils or here and there, that gives you budget, you can appoint people. I mean, that's important. And there is a status quo to that, and maintaining that is totally incompatible with reconsidering the political organization configuration. So that's in a way we've seen that. With the movement of primaries that is the latest innovation in our political landscape. There's been I'll try to very briefly describe it, try not to be partisan in the description. There's been a movement that started with Graupera, who's a candidate now at the City Council in Barcelona. He proposed that, since we need to be, since it's to get an independentist mayor, we need to get the most number of seats in the city council. So the way to do that is to go all united. It's very difficult that the parties agree to unity. So let's have an election, a primary election, to see who the candidate should be from the independentist side to the city council. Okay, that is in abstract terms a great idea, and I from the very beginning I supported it. But it also, hit the same problem, which is that parties want to control their share, and they are ready to give up unity instead in exchange for keeping at least a small share. So they rather, have a smaller share but control that share than just participate in a new organization in which they have no control, especially if you give control to people voting in primaries. That's very revolutionary. So this has failed, and it has generated a new political space. To what extent this is positive or not positive, honestly I don't have an opinion yet. I see the advantages of having these guys being a pain in the neck, which is what they are being right now. They are very critical, they complain, they nobody's good enough for them. As you just mentioned, we've burned the self-determination and we've burned unilateral. I mean, this is not true. That's not true. So when they speak like that, they say, hey, man, guys, why don't you go back to school? But on the other hand, the points they make are totally legitimate. Of some points, not these ones. So, they are totally legitimate, so in a way say, okay, well, let's see what happens if this, let's see if this takes off. Okay, so on strategic unity, if we were able to have strategic unity, then we would probably be able to organize that strategic unity. And it would have a strategic unity in Catalonia in the 21st century must have an electoral expression, I think.
Sorry, and also Albert, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Sorry?
I didn't mean to exclude you.
About what?
About the question. You're Catalan as well.
To say, I think Clara has explained it. I agree with everything she has said, except the point that we obviously I don't think we'll ever vote again or have a referendum. I don't think we'll ever see it for 40 years. But that, I hope I'm wrong. And I hope
but then that's the equivalent saying we're not going to see independence in 40 years.
I don't think we will. But I will say one thing. Okay. I think you're absolutely right that the 1st of October took us by surprise. I was here, but I went 2 days before to protect an electoral college in Manresa. And I was surprised by two things. First, that it was completely led and organized by non-political people, or well, maybe political people, but not the government. It wasn't run, organized by the government. Because they were trying to, well, I don't know why, but it seems to me they were trying to avoid being charged with sedition and rebellion, and it didn't work anyway. But these CDRs, ourselves, CDR Dublin and CDR Manresa and whatever, they organized it. And they were youngsters, which were cooks, mostly some jerks, so well organized. So, it was all assembleari, I don't know what you call that in English. Total democratic, everybody had a voice. It was fascinating as a sociological, I mean, I haven't lived in Manresa for so long, and I don't have much of a social life here, so I don't really know. I was totally shocked by how informal it was and how the civil society made it happen. And the referendum did take place. There was a referendum of self-determination. There definitely was. And the declaration is there to be enforced even when we can, but
not in 40 years, you think?
I don't think so, Clara. But
okay,
I don't
well
think
then I'll die in exile. So I cannot supply. I mean, I just have a self-interest into this. You know, I have a total. I'm absolutely. So either we keep hope, or I'll die in exile, and I'm not signing that.
No, because I think you'll return. But because you'll win in the courts, I think you will. It may take a while, but you will. But the last point I wanted to say, the main problem is that the view that we are, the 48% or the 50% or the 55% or the 70% or the 80% who want to exercise the right of self-determination, of course, it's ludicrous that we are split in 4 or 5 different groups. I think from a more conservative, and that's not my preference, but a more realistic, maybe, I don't know. I mean, I think somebody's going to throw a shoe at me, but one possibility would be if all the Catalan politicians who believed, supposedly, even the PSC, who at one point believed, yes, we have to modify the constitution, if they genuinely, if there was a possibility of all the Catalan politicians except PP, Ciudadanos and Vox planting themselves saying, no, we're not doing anything, we go together, because we are a people, we do have the right of self-determination, we go to Madrid, we stand up to the PSOE. I know they won't, but if they did, I mean, that's the only legally, within the Spanish legal system, way that this can happen, because Spain is not going to sacrifice its unity. But if all the Catalans, except PP and right wings and the fascists or whatever you want to call them, go to Madrid and say, look lads, you've got to modify the constitution, you've got to agree a referendum like Cameron did. We don't want independence, but we believe we are Catalans. We believe we have a right to make a decision. We're grown-ups. If the majority of Catalan people want to leave, of course, this is wishful thinking. But I think this is the perhaps more realistic than other options that we all would like. But I am convinced that we'll be going home before Catalonia is independent. We will.
We are running out of time, so last question. Two last questions.
I have a question on the role of the media, and Henry touched on it with some very good examples. And we see it at the moment with the trial and everything that's happened. And I remember on the 2nd of October going into work, and there was one particular guy from, I think he's from Madrid, who was quite loud, and people were saying, like, what's going on, because they knew he was from Madrid. And he said, well, they had to hit the people because the local police weren't doing anything. And they were trying to vote and it was illegal. And I eventually went up to him and I said, like, you know, I have friends who were there, you know, who were voting. And I just want to know what you think in terms of the media. Is the media shaping people's opinion, or is that a reflection really on what people think, and they're just kind of feeding that, and then it becomes more polarizing? Or can you say?
It's hard to tell, because I think what is important to know is that the structure, the economic structure of the media oligopoly in Madrid is directly linked to the media system of a Francoist system, directly. So you can trace, you know, the property sequences, what bank gives credit to whom, and so on. So in this sense, El País was for a while pretending to be, you know, the New York Times of Spain, but they fired John Carlin, which is, you know, the most distinguished journalist you could have in your payroll. But the question is, well, is Spanish public opinion just happy with this media because that makes them feel good, because that's how they lean, and therefore this media just cater to this public opinion? Or is the public opinion shaped by this media? Well, these things are, you can never disentangle those effects. It is true that because Franco died in bed, and you know the democratic movement before Franco was basically very strong in Catalonia and had some other foci, but not that many. If you have to assess what was the Spanish opinion when Franco died, well, he was late, right? And Franco was late. Now we're a democracy. I mean, this transition, this mental transition is. Not quite a transition, and that's what we're seeing now. Okay, Franco is great, now we're a democracy. What Catalans are doing is Nazism. So I mean, the logic process that goes from one to the next is just, you know, I could only attribute to a very weak democratic tradition. And yes, I mean, it would be great if there was somebody brave. There are some good or sufficiently brave media outlets, Spanish media outlets, El Público, Diario Es, but they try to avoid being confrontational on the Catalan issue. You know, when it comes to the Catalan issue, they've been decent. I mean, I don't want to dare to say that they've joined the crowd of the eyes. No, that's not the case. But still, even, you know, the fact that Podemos has the attitude that it has so far, it's, you know, it seems that if you Spania expressing criticism to the system when it comes to the abuse of human rights in Catalonia is something that is extremely, extremely, extremely difficult. We'll see.
I'm wondering if
couple of examples. I don't know if you watched yesterday the interview to Josep Borrell, the German TV. I think this illustrates very well the foreign affairs minister. He should be used to strict interviews with competent journalists, and he cannot even answer a few questions that I don't know. He quit the interview 3 times. The same happened with a former, I don't know if he was the minister, Dusty, or he was being interviewed by the BBC, and he went mad and started to say
that the images were
fake news and these kind of things. And from my experience about press in Spain, I kept seeing a clear evolution from my friends, for example, who are left-wing, for example, during October 2017, most of them supported the Catalan politician, the Catalan leaders, the Catalan, let's say, revolution. But I see now that most of them, they are legitimating what's going on in this court, in the Supreme Court nowadays. And they even say that these people should go to prison for years, the same people. So this means that something has happened in the meanwhile, in this year and a half. Like if you are exposed day by day, to very biased information, this is very sad for us. I mean, I'm just describing this, and I feel very incompetent to do anything against this. But well, from our side, I think we just need to support any struggle in the rest of Spain that tries to be reinforce criticism against this. Yeah.
Last question over there.
It was a similar question. Yeah.
It's answered. Okay. Good. Yeah. The event.
So thank you all for coming. Thank you, the panelists, for your opinions and be here. I would ask another round of applause for our panelists. And the last thing to say is that we will try to keep organizing events like that. There is a solidarity box over there if you want to help us pay the expenses for the organization, and we will be very pleased if you give some. And that's it. Just to finish, we have a video which is a collection of ideas that they have been sent here. So, yeah.
More than ever, we live in worrying times. Brexit looms in the UK, weakening Britain and the EU. Authoritarianism is on the march in countries like Hungary and Poland. Matteo Salvini's intolerant ideas have reached the Italian government. And unfortunately, there's still more going on. Did you know that fundamental rights are being challenged in Spain? A year ago, an unsanctioned referendum on self-determination was held in Catalonia, and over 2 million people went to the polling stations to exercise their right to vote. To prevent this, the Spanish government had previously deployed 10,000 police officers throughout Catalonia. They raided polling stations, like this one behind me, beating peaceful voters standing in line to vote and seizing ballot boxes. Accountable for the police brutality. In contrast, 2 civil society leaders, 6 former Catalan government officials, several members of the Catalan parliament, and almost 1,000 other people are now being put on trial. What's more, 7 Catalan political leaders are currently in exile in the UK, Belgium, and Switzerland. They would have been imprisoned if they had remained in Spain. What was their crime? Exercising their civil rights and supporting people's right to vote. Several international human rights associations have condemned this situation and have raised the alarm that various fundamental rights may have been violated, like those of Jordi Cuixart, for instance. He is the president of Òmnium Cultural Cultural, the main cultural and pro-civil rights association in Catalonia. Inexplicably, he has been charged with rebellion and could be facing a 17-year prison sentence. But did Jordi Cuixart really take part in a rebellion? No, because according to Spain's criminal code, the charge of rebellion is only applicable to cases of participation in a violent uprising aimed at carrying out a coup. Yet there was no violent uprising in Catalonia in 2017, and not just because I say so. Impartial courts in Germany and Belgium have already dismissed the charge. The referendum supporters were always peaceful. As a matter of fact, Jordi Cuixart is well known as a pacifist who called for peaceful protests at all times. However, he has been in pre-trial detention without bail or trial for more than a year. His civil rights have been violated: freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and the right to peacefully protest. If Jordi Cuixart is convicted, it would set a worrying precedent for other activists advocating for human rights across Europe. It is likewise shocking that Vox, a Spanish extreme right-wing political party, has been allowed to be one of the accusers on this trial. This adds up to what many law experts deem a flawed judicial process, hence an unfair trial. Besides, prison sentences for all the defendants would only increase the political tensions between Catalonia and Spain, rather than create the political climate required to resolve the crisis. The Catalan issue should be settled by political means, not by judicial ones. Europe should urge both the Spanish and Catalan governments to sit down at the negotiating table to find a political and democratic solution. Help us to solve this situation. Stand up for human rights in Europe. Share this video. Send an email to your political representatives. You can make a difference. We can all protect European values.
Thank you again.